and welcome to week 2 of Great Decisions 2026. Before we get started, and I turn things over to Professor Farrell, of course, well, hello, Darlene. I usually expect to see you over there.
I got lucky.
Congratulations.
My hearing isn't that good, so I gotta sit up here.
Oh,
Yeah.
all right.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
No problem. Welcome. Anyway, I would like to thank the sponsors of our program because without them, we would not be able to do this every Monday in February and March. So, without further ado, a big thank you to the League of Women Voters of Manitowoc County, the Manitowoc Public Library Foundation, the Manitowoc Public Library, and the Lakeshore Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. So, a big round of applause for our sponsors. Before I introduce Professor Farrell tonight, I just want to call your attention to an amazing program that we have coming up a week from this Thursday. On Thursday, February 19th, from 6 to 7 p.m., the program is called Mental Health in Teens, a Primer for Adults. It's being presented by Rachel Gordon, who's a certified substance abuse counselor with Lakeview Psychological Associates. And essentially what the evening is focusing on is that teens are under an incredible amount of pressure these days, and stressors are coming at them from every angle. And this is a program so that parents, friends, caregivers know what to look for, that teens may be headed for a crisis. So if this is of interest to you at all, it happens next Thursday, February 19th from 6 to 7. So let's get to the matter of why you're here tonight. Martin Farrell recently retired after 44 years of college and university teaching political science and international relations, the last 40 at Ripon College. He is the author of over 70 peer-reviewed articles, book chapters, and conference papers. He led students on 10 study abroad experiences, beginning with China in 1981, as well as Russia, Eastern Europe, and Italy. His own travel and research have taken him to over 50 countries on 6 continents. He also recently retired from elective office after 28 years on the Fond du Lac County Board of Supervisors, the last 16 as chair. Among other honors, he was named Wisconsin Peace Educator of the Year in 2016 by the Wisconsin Institute for Peace and Conflict Studies. He continues to do independent research and make public presentations, such as the one this evening, and he is the sole presenter to have been at all 20 years of Great Decisions at Manitowoc Public Library. Professor Martin Farrell, everyone.
Excuse me. Thank you very much, Tim.
Is your mic on?
Testing, 1, 2, 3.
Is the green mic on?
No. Testing, 1, 2, 3. Okay. That's the extent of my technical expertise. Thank goodness for Max and Tim here, because I also forgot to bring my laptop. So we had to find one here. But no, thank you very much. Great turnout tonight. I've enjoyed coming over here for all these many years, and I'm deeply honored that you invite me back, and I'll try to do it justice. Tonight, as you can see, our topic is alliance destruction and nuclear weapons proliferation, a third and last nuclear age. So our 3 areas of interest will be nuclear weapons, attempts at arms control, but also alliances. And it's the fact that if our alliances are weakening, how does that affect the third item, nuclear proliferation, which refers to proliferation, of course, means more and more countries obtaining nuclear weapons. So as we'll see, there are 9 currently that we know of, and we're pretty confident about that. But if the United States umbrella for a number of our allies in various parts of the world whether it be Europe or Asia or the Middle East? Will that make it more likely that additional nations will feel necessary to obtain their own nuclear deterrent? And if so, what does that mean for the likelihood of a horrific nuclear conflict, which I think we certainly want to avoid if we possibly can? Now, I prepared quite a few slides here tonight, probably too many. I apologize. Some of them will probably skip over pretty fast. You just don't have time to go into that much detail. But I guess why I try to present visual expressions of the information is that I guess I'm kind of old school in a way. I believe that when I'm standing up here telling you something, asserting something about the world, I think it's necessary to actually have evidence for what I'm saying. I know that's kind of old school, isn't it? There are certain places that we don't hear that from. But I also realize that there's a lot of detail, more than we can handle. And I definitely want to have plenty of time for questions, because we are at a very fraught moment in our nation's history. I think we're all aware of that, no matter what side of things we're on. But in our foreign relations, we're going down paths that we haven't gone down for the last 80 years. And it's alleged that the old paths are no good anymore, and new paths are necessary. But this is a time of choice, and you as the citizens and the voters need to have a decisive voice in those choices. So I want to hear your questions and your comments, as well as have the opportunity to give you some observations from my viewpoint. So if we look today, these are the global nuclear stockpiles. So you can see that there are upwards of 14,000 nuclear weapons held by the nuclear states, mainly over 90%, 92% held by Russia and the United States. But France, China, United Kingdom, those are the original nuclear powers acknowledged in the Non-Proliferation Pact. The other four are not authorized to have nuclear weapons, but develop them anyway. Either they didn't join the Non-Proliferation Agreement, or in the case of North Korea, joined it but then withdrew when they decided to develop their own nuclear weapons. On the right-hand side is from the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. And ever since the advent of nuclear weapons, they have given us a doomsday clock every year. And they just recently refreshed their reading of that clock. And if you can see here right now, it's closer to midnight, which is global catastrophe, only 1 minute and 45 seconds away. The lowest it's been at least since 1953, and in fact, even closer to doomsday. And why is that? Because they believe the danger of a nuclear catastrophe is more imminent now than it has been any time since nuclear weapons were developed. And I'm not here to scare you tonight, but this is them, not me. These are the atomic scientists themselves saying this. But I thought we would have a bit of a refresher on nuclear weapons first, just so we kind of understand what we're dealing with. Back in the 1890s, scientists, including Madame Curie and her husband, started to notice that certain atomic nuclei were unstable. They were actually breaking down. That's not a common occurrence. You know, most things seem pretty solid. But for instance, radium was giving off energy, radioactivity. And if we move up to 1905, Albert Einstein gives us this famous formula, E equals mc squared. Again, for over 100 years, scientists had adhered to the law of conservation of matter. And that was the idea that the total amount of matter in the universe was constant. Matter was never being destroyed nor created. Its form was changing. So if you burn a piece of wood, the form goes from solid ultimately to gas and then some ash left over. But the amount of matter, if you could weigh all of that, the water vapor, the smoke, the ash, all the results of the fire, the mass would be the same. And this is true when it comes to things like fire or even chemical explosions. If you blow up a stick of dynamite, if you could somehow collect all the bits and pieces, you'd still have the same amount of matter. But what Einstein figured out was that, actually that's false. Actually, matter and energy are interchangeable. And in fact, if you look at other, even more recent scientific research, things like this table are actually an illusion. It's actually all energy. It feels solid. If I hit my head on it, it'll hurt me. But in fact, it's various energy fields of tiny charged particles that are making up what we think is matter. But what Einstein's formula also shows us is because E is energy, the amount of energy, M is the amount of mass that's destroyed or converted to energy, then we have C squared. That's the speed of light. That's a very big number. That's in our terms, it's 182,000 miles per second. So it's a very big number. So if we assume 1 gram of matter, a gram is, a tiny amount. We have the formula that's given there, times that huge number, gives us the amount of energy 9 times 10 to the 13th power joules. Okay, what's a joule? A joule is approximately the amount of energy it would take me to lift a medium-sized apple 1 meter. So if I lift that 1 meter, that's approximately 1 joule. But if we convert 1 gram of matter, we actually get 90 trillion joules of energy. So from 1 gram of matter converted to energy, that's the equivalent of me lifting 90 trillion apples. And I try to get in my strength training, but that one is kind of a tall order. I don't think I have enough time left, quite honestly. Converting Einstein's brain, all of it to energy, would yield 26 megatons equivalent of TNT. That's the size of the larger nuclear weapons today. Converts about that amount of matter into energy. So this is a tremendous source of energy. And as the scientists, including Einstein and Leo Szilard, realized this, they wrote a letter to President Roosevelt saying that if Germany got hold of this kind of weapon with what Hitler was doing in the 1930s, this would be a disaster. So this is when Britain first initiated a project, then we developed the Manhattan Project. And these are the first 2 nuclear weapons that we developed. The one on the left here was called Little Boy. The other one was called Fat Man. Not going to go into all the details of this, but one was sort of a trigger and rifle setup where a conventional explosion on the left end compresses radioactive material, uranium-235 or plutonium. When it's compressed under tremendous pressure and heat, that starts the fission reaction, which then converts the matter into energy with tremendous force. And the bottom one is the implosion type, where the conventional explosives are circling around and then compressing that radioactive material until it becomes a critical mass and explodes. These were the two bombs used against Japan. Little man on the left, little boy on the left was used on Hiroshima, August 6, 1945. The yield was 15,000 tons or kilotons, as we say, of TNT. Fat man was used in Nagasaki. The yielding was more efficient, yielded 21,000 tons or 21 kilotons equivalent of TNT. And as we know, the two cities were largely destroyed, hundreds of thousands killed, many instantly, but others stretched out over months, even years, due to the burns, radiation, and emotional trauma. But even during the Manhattan Project, certain scientists believed that much more matter, about 4 times as much, could be converted to energy by using nuclear fusion, not fission. So instead of splitting large, unstable atoms like uranium-235 or plutonium, now we're going to fuse small light elements into a slightly larger molecule, but releasing even way more energy. So we can see here we have deuterium and tritium. These are radioactive isotopes of hydrogen. They're combined, fused into one helium atom, which then also releases a neutron and a large amount of energy. Now, these units here are quite small, mega electron volts. But again, you got to realize that's one atom. So if you have billions of atoms, you'll get even more energy, 4 times as much as converting matter with fission. So these are the H-bombs or thermonuclear bombs, as they're known. And again, they actually need to start with a fission explosion. That's necessary to get fusion going, because you need tremendous temperature and pressure to get those atoms to fuse. This is why conventional energy from nuclear fusion is so difficult. They have reactors, and I guess they're getting closer to making this possible and feasible, although it's very difficult. Because to have a nuclear reactor that is creating the type of temperature and pressure, first of all, where do you get the energy to create 1 million degrees centigrade temperature and untold overpressures of pressure to get that fusion reaction going? Where does that energy come from? And secondly, how do you contain it safely? When it's in a bomb, it's going to go kablooey, and it's going to destroy a lot of stuff. But in a nuclear reactor, obviously, you got to prevent that. So it's very difficult. But here we start the explosion with an actual fission or A-bomb explosion, and that then compresses the fusion fuel, which is usually lithium deuteride, and then that begins in a millionth of a second the fusion reaction. Okay, I guess with that, let's look at the contemporary delivery systems for the nuclear weapons. I don't have time to go through this in detail, but generally speaking, the United States and Russia, we both have a triad. So we have land-based ICBMs, we have submarine-based ballistic missiles. Tactically, we have cruise missiles, and then we have aircraft. We have bombs on aircraft. So if we went through this in detail, we'd see that what we have currently going, but they are planning updates, modernizations, and moving forward with new systems in the future. These things, ideally, in my opinion, should be controlled by nuclear weapons agreements. But unfortunately, we don't have any of those left right now. And it does not look like the current administration is interested in pursuing them. They have said that they would consider it if all the nuclear powers were involved. But it's been difficult enough to get just the two big ones that have 92% of the weapons to agree to limit some of the numbers and some of the technologies. But to get all 9, including North Korea, Israel, to agree to something would be very difficult. We'll talk about that a little bit later. You probably heard about hypersonic missiles lately. Russia has talked about possibly using these in Ukraine. Hypersonic just means, very fast. So they can go between Mach 5 and Mach 10. Mach 10 will be 10 times the speed of sound. It's extremely fast. Also, they don't have to go as high. So if you see here, the one would be carried in an airplane and then released, but it just follows the curvature of the Earth, whereas a ballistic missile goes up here and can be seen by radar fairly early in its flight path. But you can see here, radar is not going to be able to see these. And yes, we have some defensive systems in place. They are not designed to fend off. Again, it goes from an airplane, and this one is from ground, but it doesn't have the parabolic trajectory of a traditional ICBM, which could be seen here. These will not be seen until much, much later. There's a new movie, Catherine Bigelow. She did Hurt Locker, a few others. She has a new one called House of Fire. And it is about a nuclear missile being launched at the United States in the contemporary era. And I think it's very realistic to show what defenses we have. I'm not going to spoil the movie for you, but we don't have very good defenses against ICBMs, to say nothing of hypersonic missiles. So there's some emerging instability here. Why don't we have better defensive systems? There's a reason for that. Because the whole nuclear balance of terror that's been maintained all these years, 80 years now, is based on the idea of deterrence. So you will not attack me because you know, and I'm not picking on you, you're just kidding, but you don't attack me because you know that I could withstand everything you send at me and still retaliate with enough to do unacceptable damage to you. It's called MAD, mutual assured destruction. And that's why we haven't had perhaps a nuclear war or nuclear attack, because the main parties are deterred by that suicidal fear that if I start it, I'll be destroyed. But if I have a defensive system, now what? A really good one that can pick off the enemy's missiles coming in. Now what's my thinking? Well, maybe I can go ahead and attack them. I might not get them all, but with the ones they have left coming back at me, I can pick off with my defensive system. See, so having a defensive system that was really effective would actually be offensive. It would give me an incentive to attack. And that's why both sides, Soviet Union, United States, now Russia, United States, agreed not to build robust defensive systems. We have limited systems to hopefully pick off something from, let's say, North Korea or some other rogue actor. But if you watch the movie, you'll see it's not guaranteed to work. So, but I recommend it because it's a good way of, you see exactly what's involved. All the military and scientific personnel, that are involved in this. As far as the effects go, again, we don't have time to go into detail, but the effects depend on the size of the detonation, how many kilotons, or now megatons. Biggest one tested ever was the Tsar bomb by the Soviet Union, yielded the equivalent of 50 million tons of TNT. So, but those aren't operational. You don't need a weapon anywhere near that size. Most of them are 1 megaton. They're actually in the arsenals or less. But it also says, where is the height of the burst? So they would be detonated while they're still up in the air. They wouldn't hit the ground like a conventional bomb and go off. Why not? Because if they did that, much of the explosive power would be wasted in the terms of the bomb maker. We would just dig a big hole. So in order to get the maximum damage, for instance, with a 1 megaton weapon, they want to detonate it about 2 kilometers up in the air. That's where you get the maximum destruction. But you can see that buildings are destroyed. The energy is distributed 50% blast, 35% thermal radiation, 15% nuclear radiation. So depending on how close you are, or your building can be vaporized, severe burns, blindness, and so forth. It's a disaster. Now, the destructive power of all existing nuclear weapons today, about 12,400 devices, is the equivalent of 2.2 billion tons of TNT. So what the nuclear powers today have is equal to 146,500 Hiroshima-sized weapons. Yeah, you saw what those 2 weapons did. This is not enough to literally destroy the Earth, but easily enough to kill hundreds of millions or even billions of people and cause untold destruction. I'm not trying to minimize the risk at all, but when people say they could destroy the Earth 3 times over or something like that, that actually isn't true. I understand the sentiment, and I don't want to see any of them. That's one reason I'm here. I'm trying to help prevent it happening. But we had, for instance, in recent times, an asteroid hit Earth. This is the one in the so-called Chicxulub asteroid off the Yucatan coast. I say recent, that was 65 million years ago. But I am getting up there, so for me, that's recent. No, seriously, there were other asteroids like billions of years ago, but this is when there were mammals and dinosaurs and almost, what was it, 75% of all species were exterminated, rendered extinct by that asteroid. It was about 20 to 30 kilometers in diameter, but the explosive force of that was much more than what our nuclear weapons are, and it didn't destroy the Earth. That was the equivalent of 4 billion Hiroshimas. So, but that's just a minor point, but as somebody who studied this, even if we tried our hardest, we couldn't literally destroy Earth. We could possibly destroy most life, which certainly is much more than reason enough to try to prevent it. So these are, again, the countries and the numbers that they have. So these are the 3 strategies given the extreme negative consequences of nuclear war. Deterrence rather than war fighting. In other words, as I said before, try to prevent it because of the consequences. But arms control agreements also And thirdly, non-proliferation strategies. Again, I'm going to go over this quickly because we've already kind of covered this. So in other words, one of my old professors, Albert Wohlstetter, actually wrote a seminal article in 1958. I didn't know him quite that early, but I would have been in grade school, but later in grad school. But his article was called The Delicate Balance of Terror. And he pointed out that deterrence was not that easy from the viewpoint of Pearl Harbor. Look what happened at Pearl Harbor. We had destroyers, battleships, and lots of planes all destroyed because they were vulnerable. They're just sitting out there. So Albert Wohlstetter said, if you think you can deter somebody from attacking you just because you have 100 nuclear weapons on airplanes somewhere, if the airplanes are sitting out in the open in plain sight, they could be destroyed in a Pearl Harbor type attack, and you have nothing. So you have no deterrent. This is why we started burying the ICBMs in fortified bunkers in the Dakotas, Wyoming, so forth. This is why we developed submarine-launched weapons. That's the second leg of the triad. These submarines are submerged, and the enemy doesn't know where they are. They can fire if they need to without any possibility of being preempted. And then thirdly, still some on bombers for the third leg to keep the Air Force happy, I guess. But that's the thinking, the kind of thinking we have to do here. Now, deterrence is not perfect. It is a delicate balance of terror, as Albert Wohlstetter pointed out. And, it's not pretty. It involves me threatening you with your destruction. And in fact, our mutual destruction. That's not fun. Also, nuclear parity might encourage lower level conventional or regional conflict. So in other words, this is one reason Russia thought they could get away with invading Ukraine. Are we going to threaten to nuke them? No, they could nuke us back. And so we're limited in what we can do about it. That's assuming we want to help Ukraine, which we did for a while, but I'm not sure anymore. But that's another topic. But that's an example of hiding behind a nuclear deterrent to commit aggression. Also, failure results in global devastation, including possibly nuclear winter. So that's, if there's a miscalculation or somebody makes a mistake, things can be on a hair trigger. And now, especially with the hypersonic weapons, that puts things on even more of a hair trigger because you have even less warning. So if you think you're about to be attacked, maybe you go ahead and, this is issue the order to counterattack. And what if you were wrong? What if it wasn't? There have been a few cases like that with our radar in the Arctic detecting what we thought might be a nuclear attack. Fortunately, we didn't retaliate immediately, but we weren't sure for a while. It happened a couple of times. So these are the major arms control treaties that have tried to restrict this. And, some of them had success. They did reduce the numbers by the two main parties. But all of these are now either expired or withdrawn from. So at the present time, we have nothing. New START just was expired last week. And as I said, there's some very vague talk, but no real movement toward a new one. You see, we did bring down the Russia, Soviet, and U.S. arsenal from the peak in the 80s. So it was brought down to the current levels. And the New START treaty, which is here, did bring them down to under 1,600, under 1,500. And it was it did control the numbers. But now there's talk of modernization, expansion. China is building up from 600 weapons, a small fraction of what Russia and the United States have, but they are adding to their arsenal, probably going to have about 1,000 by the end of this decade. We had the Treaty on Non-Proliferation, which, again, most countries have signed, 191. They pledged not to develop nuclear weapons. But this is part of our problem tonight. If the United States, for example, is no longer a reliable ally to provide a nuclear umbrella for our NATO allies or for South Korea or for Japan, what then is to stop them from developing nuclear weapons? The answer is they may well decide they have to do that. What are the dangers of increased nuclear proliferation? Regional instability and proliferation cascades. What's a cascade? Well, it means, if Japan gets a nuclear weapon, well, then maybe Taiwan thinks they need one. Well, then maybe Vietnam thinks they better have one. And then maybe, I don't know if Cambodia would have the capability, but they might develop the incentive. It contributes to instability. We've had a fairly stable situation for several decades now. Yes, we had those states, India, Pakistan, North Korea, Israel, that weren't supposed to develop them, but they did. But still, that's only a handful. Now we could have a lot more. It gives us more nuclear states, leading to these launch-on warming hair trigger usage. If you don't even know where it's coming from, that really adds to the confusion. And that's part of the Bigelow film. We don't know where it came from. So that complicates our response. But the more possibilities, the more complicated that becomes. Leveraging nuclear threats and conflicts leads to escalation. So again, we're seeing that with Russia today in Ukraine. Putin has threatened more than once he might use a nuclear weapon if he's somehow provoked. If the West does something he doesn't like. Well, then this is an escalation. Then we would have to escalate our response in turn. And we could have an upward spiral leading to catastrophe. And another point, proliferation makes more weapons vulnerable to acquisition by non-state actors, not subject to deterrence. So in other words, if I'm a terrorist group, I get a nuclear weapon, well, why not use it? They don't know who to retaliate against. You can't deter somebody that doesn't have a territorial base. And so that's the more different countries, some have good security, some don't. But the more you have, the likelihood is going to increase. Also, same for miscalculation and accidents. The more that you have, the more likely that is. So potential states, if proliferation occurs, the red countries are current nuclear powers. The orange ones are those four that developed it on their own, even though they weren't supposed to. But the light, the blue countries are countries that could have nuclear weapons, but up till now have said we're not going to. We're going to voluntarily abstain. So every one of those, including Japan, South Korea, Australia, a number of European nations, and even 2 in Latin America, Brazil and Argentina, and 3 or 4 in Africa, do have the capability of developing a nuclear weapon. Okay, enough on that for now. Let's talk about our allies, alliances. In the 20th century, the United States and its allies utterly defeated all 4 nations attempting to gain hegemony in major world regions. So in World War I, we and our allies were able to defeat Imperial Germany. Partly because, well, in every one of these cases, we had superior allies. Yes, we may have carried a bulk of the fighting force, not in every case, but in most of them. But we had better allies. So Germany just had, in World War I, basically Austro-Hungarian Empire, very weak, not very consequential. The Western allies were stronger, especially when the United States joined in. That is what broke the stalemate in World War I. World War II, Nazi Germany, Imperial Japan did not have very good allies. Italy, that was about it. They had movements that joined them, but we had the United States and the Soviet Union. Don't forget that. And Russia defeated Germany in the East. And that was very crucial in stopping the Nazi aggression. But we also had, France was not a very good ally at that time, but Britain, Churchill, tremendous. Canada was a good ally. And similarly in the Cold War, the Soviet Union had, yes, China, but China was very weak for most of that time. They didn't really start to develop until the 1980s. North Korea, a few others. But we had all the Western European countries, strong economies, partly because we helped them rebuild after the war. But we had superior allies. But our allies were with us all the way. And they're true up to even to the present day. Even though, again, unfortunately, our president has denied this and has said that our allies never help us. They're just trying to take advantage of us. Whereas, in fact, after 9/11 happened, 2001, NATO invoked for the only time in its history, Article 5, that was considered an attack on every NATO country, and every NATO country sent forces into Afghanistan to get rid of the Taliban, who was harboring Al-Qaeda. And they suffered casualties, even more than we did in some cases, not in the total numbers, but as a percentage of their population. Denmark actually lost more lives in Afghanistan than the United States on a per capita basis. Yet, how do you think they feel when they're being told they never did anything? Or if they went to Afghanistan, they ducked away from the front lines. From someone who took 5 medical deferments in the Vietnam era. Sorry, I'm not trying to be personal, but I just can't avoid it in some of these cases. Look, this is D-Day. This is D-Day. This is attacking the beaches at Normandy, and look who's there. Yes, there's 2 US divisions, but there's also 2 British and 1 Canadian right beside us. And this is what it took. But I'm going to jump ahead here a little bit now and point out that this is also the situation that after World War II, we, the United States, tried to avoid. And this is why we kept most of our allies and asked them to work with us to prevent now Soviet aggression. And that meant setting up 30-some US military bases in their countries in Europe. And yes, we funded those and paid our soldiers, but often the host country did also bear the price because it was their turf that was being defended. But here's the really crucial thing. Is it better to take that proactive action and that forward defense, be there in advance, or wait, as we did in World War II, until the Nazis had taken over almost all of Europe, and then try to get them out? I'm sure many of you do know how hard that was. That's cost millions of lives to get the German Wehrmacht out of Europe. That's what this landing was all about, and so many other things. So the idea of having allies and forward bases, yes, it's costly, but does it cost as much as trying to reverse a situation once it's happened? No, what we learned is you've got to try to prevent this before it happens. And that's why we spend the money and the resources in order to put those defenses there and prevent that attack, prevent that aggression, prevent those incursions from happening. And also, I would point out that right after the war, yes, the United States did take the leading role in forming NATO, but had all these other countries add on over time. But again, 2 points. What kind of shape were the Western European countries in 1945? They were destroyed. Even the farm fields were destroyed. The factories were destroyed. They had nothing. We had 80% of world GDP in 1945 because of the damage in Europe and in Asia. Japan was destroyed. Much of China was destroyed. The Philippines. So we were the ones that had the resource base to lead the way. And for 80 years, we have continued that. But that is in danger of being abandoned now. So let's take a look. Okay, don't have time here, but there's a lot of other institutions that we set up, not just NATO, but again, a lot of these are being undermined right now also. But I want to move on now to the fact of zero-sum thinking, because I think that's what's behind some of the actions being taken today. In other words, powerful people, or at least one of them, believes that zero-sum situations are all that exist, in the world. In other words, if I gain, it has to be at your expense, or if you gain, it has to be at my expense. Okay, there are some situations like that. If we have 6 people come over to my house, let's say to play poker, they each bring $100. Okay, there's only $600. So if I walk out with 599, then the rest have only 1. But that's unusual. Most things aren't like that. If you, in cooperation, doing things that are mutually beneficial, the total sum of goods should increase. And then we can share. We may not share absolutely equally, but we share according to some principles that we agree on, and we share the benefits. It's a win-win situation. Or you can even have negative sum situations where both parties lose. They engage in something, they both lose, such as war. So we look at Russia today, they considered this war in Ukraine so vital. Do you know how many Russians have died in Ukraine so far in these about 3 years? The total casualties are over 1.2 million, but that's killed, wounded, or missing. But actual deaths, just to take out whatever degree of severity the injuries might be, the deaths are reliably estimated, and there are whole groups working at this every day, checking obituaries, all that, because the Russians don't give us honest figures. Over 250,000 deaths. Can you tell me that controlling a 15 or 20% of Ukraine, if that's what he ends up with, is worth that? Again, I'm sure many of you remember we lost over 50,000 deaths of our brave men and women in Vietnam. And that was considered a national catastrophe. This is 5 times as many in a country that isn't as big. It's pretty big, about 190 million, but it's not as big as the United States. 250,000 deaths. I don't see how anybody could think that a few square kilometers of land there is worth that. A few more lighthearted examples: bar fights, headbutting. Okay, then there's a prisoner's dilemma, which you don't really have time for, but it's a classic game theory. Many of you have heard of it, I'm sure. It's the idea that two people are brought in by the authorities. They're not allowed to talk to each other. If neither one of them talks, they'll both get off. But if one talks and the other doesn't, the one who doesn't will get a severe penalty. So I'm sitting there thinking, oh my gosh, if I talk, then I'll get a lesser penalty because I pled guilty, get a plea bargain. But I'm sitting there thinking, I don't know what the other person's going to do. But if he talks and I don't, I'm screwed. So I better talk. So they both end up talking. They're both worse off. If they both kept their mouths shut, and I'm not encouraging law breaking, by the way. This is a hypothetical. You get the idea. That's a negative. They're both worse off. But chaotic, unpredictable economic policies are also negative some, and also so are tariffs and trade wars. Obviously, I'm not big on tariffs and trade wars. Why? Because tariffs raise prices, so the consumers have less discretionary income, leading to a contraction of the economy. If I have to pay more for the washing machine because there's a tax on the steel, then I have less money to go out to dinner or to spend on some other activity or service or product. And retaliatory tariffs reduce the demand for exports because now my exports are more expensive. That reduces income for exporters like Grande Cheese in our area in Fond du Lac County. I've talked with them a number of times. They make millions of dollars selling dried milk to Mexico. But what happens if we get into a trade war with Mexico? They lose all of that because there's other places to get dehydrated milk. And if you're going to be punishing Mexico with tariffs, arbitrary tariffs, they will probably retaliate. It's a lose-lose situation. So now, quickly, I'm going to argue that the strategic and economic situation set up after World War II and then augmented through other agreements like General Agreement on Tariffs and Trades was a win-win situation. Because by facilitating trade, trade goes up. The down point there was the financial collapse in 2008, 2009. But tariffs were going down, trade was going up, and this one goes all the way back to the 19th century. But you see that after about 1960s, tremendous growth in world GDP because countries were trading together better. It's more efficient. Countries concentrate on what they do well. It's more productive. Economic growth was spectacular. Again, this is global GDP. Just since 1980, yes, trade increased over 12 times, but the total size of the global economy grew from 22 trillion to 117.2 trillion last year. That's a 538% increase since 1980. In 1980, 46% of the world's population lived in extreme poverty. Today, that figure has been reduced to just 8.1%. And average global lifespan has increased from 60 to 74 years. Foreign direct investment grew from 1.4 trillion to 41 trillion, 29-fold increase. That's 2,900%. The U.S. is the leading recipient at 5.4 trillion received every year. A lot of that comes from Europe. Some of it comes from China, Japan, also very big investor in the United States. We are the biggest recipient. That's before any of these special deals we've supposedly been hearing about. We already were the number one recipient. Why? Because they want access to our market. They like the way we do business. They see it as a good investment. That's not buying our bonds. That's actually setting up factories here. That's called greenfields investment or mergers and acquisitions. That's buying American companies. That's direct investment. Portfolio investment, stocks, bonds, debt grew even faster. Now, was the United States, as we're told, being taken advantage of this whole time? Were we being sucked dry by leeches, these other countries all taking advantage of us, sucking us dry? Well, our job growth doesn't seem to show it. That's our job growth from 1950 until 2025. You see the number of jobs almost tripled. The only downturn is during COVID and a slowdown during these gray bars, which are recessions. And you see that GDP of the United States far outstrips any other country. Yes, China's been catching up, but still not in nominal terms, they're not there. So again, if we are being sucked dry, I don't see it. And finally, our share of global GDP, sure, it's not as high as it was at the end of the World War II, if that's what you want to compare it to, because so much of the world was destroyed. Of course they didn't have anything. But if you look since, yeah, there's been some ups and downs, but since 2010, our share of global GDP has grown steadily. With 5% of the world's population, we have 26.3% of the income. I just don't know where the evidence is that we've been being taken advantage of. And if you look at the fact that the United States dominates this global financial system that's been set up for 80 years. So again, I don't have time to go through every single detail, but we have the biggest amount of foreign currency reserves. 64% of global debt is denominated in dollars. Dollars, the international currency. I would hate to see this destroyed, but it's in the process of being destroyed right now with the chaotic, unpredictable, irrational economic policies. This is actually what is threatening our position. And the dollar, as you know, is becoming weaker. People are starting to look for other ways to store their wealth. They are not seeing the United States in dollar-denominated investment. The value of the dollar is down about 13% in the last year. That's not a catastrophe yet. There's some upside to it. It does make our exports cheaper, but it's not going to be anywhere near enough to make up for what we have lost. But what's worse is what's threatened to be lost. Okay, were we being taken advantage of by the World Trade Organization? Again, running short on time here, but no. We actually won most of the cases, 90% of the cases that we brought as a complainant. We won almost every case brought against China. No country has a judge on the panel deciding its cases, as was alleged. But President Trump blocked the appointment of new judges, basically destroyed the organization. So now we don't have any rule keepers. Now it's all about threats, bluster, extortion. Do what I tell you to do, or I'll put astronomical tariffs without regard to rules or U.S. law, for that matter. Okay, enough for that. Let's move on to our alliances briefly, and then we'll conclude and open it up. But these are countries that are allies. You can see that we have found it advantageous to have allies in all the key areas of the world. You know, after World War II, Europe was key, but we have them in East Asia, we have them in South Asia, we have them in the Middle East, we have them in Latin America. And you see all these countries now. That adds up to more than 71 because there's overlapping memberships in some of the organizations. But all of this is threatened today because of the thought that these are just parasites feeding on our milk, with us allegedly getting nothing in return. But the number one thing that we have gotten in return is no great power war for 80 years. And historians tell us that that's the longest period of time that the world has gone without a major power war, like World War I, World War II, earlier conflicts of that nature. This is the longest period we have gone since the founding of the nation-state system with the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648. That's almost 400 years. And yet this is the system that is being destroyed in front of our very eyes. Again, we have some polls showing most Americans want the United States to continue its leading role. And as Samuel Huntington pointed out, a world without U.S. primacy will be a world with more violence and disorder, less democracy and economic growth. Again, I'm going to have to skip over this, but again, we've already covered this. It's better to prevent conflict by deterring an enemy through alliances and forward deployments than to try to liberate areas after the fact. That's why we need to have these alliances and these commitments. Teaming with allies augments our military, strategic, economic, and diplomatic power. We're much stronger together than alone. And that's very true in Europe. We only had about 50,000 troops in Germany during the Cold War era. That wasn't enough to stop the Red Army. But that was a trigger that if our soldiers were killed, we would then put everything we had into it. And that in turn encouraged the European countries to build up their defenses as well. Now, I know there's been some unhappiness that recently they haven't spent as much on defense as we would like, but they have been listening and they have been increasing. And some now are spending more than the United States as a percentage of GDP. That would be some of the Baltic countries because they feel threatened, and Poland because they feel threatened. But the other nations are improving it. And yes, we made the biggest contribution, but we had the biggest economy. And also that allowed us to be the leaders. That gave us more weight in deciding what NATO does or deciding what other of these treaty organizations do. And by the way, also, let's say, again, I know this was in the earlier days, but after World War II, did you really want Germany to build up a huge army again? Did you want Japan to build up a big aggressive army again? No, don't worry about it. We'll take care of it. We'll take care of you. Okay, that's less valid today. Germany is probably going to have to, and they already committed to build up their forces. But does that mean we walk away and say, you're on your own now? Do we really not care about Europe? And that's, again, there's a number of other points here. But again, I think today we are having a zero-sum approach that threatens to shatter these 80-year-old frameworks. Let's see only the costs of leadership, where the allies reap all the benefits, doesn't like tedious discussions that limit his freedom of action. Long-standing treaties and agreements have no intrinsic value. Existing trade agreements interfere with his use of tariffs to threaten people with or even punish them. Okay, it hasn't been isolationist. So if you look at the chart, you can see that in 1 year, Mr. Trump has carried out 658 military strikes, and the map shows where they have been. For the Biden 4 years, slightly more, 694, but almost as many in 1 year as in Biden's 4 years. IR theorists are not sure how to characterize our new foreign policy. Is it America first? America alone? Hyper-nationalist unilateralism. So that means it's all about me and I act alone. It's all about me and I do whatever I want, whenever I want. I don't care what anybody else says. That's one approach or concept of where we are headed. Another one is predatory hegemony. That means the hegemon is the strongest person in the area, but if I'm the biggest one in the Western Hemisphere, then I can prey on every other country there because I'm the strongest and might makes right. So I can be the apex predator for the area that I have control over. Or are we going back to even a pre-20th century imperialism, where we just grab as much territory as we can and milk it for what we can get out of it? Plunder. Or are we going back to 19th century balance of power, spheres of influence? Are we really saying, okay, Russia, you can have Europe, because we don't care about Europe anymore. And China, you can have East Asia, because we don't care about it anymore. You want Taiwan? Go ahead. Some of his advisors have said this, but others have not. Others have said China is the leading potential adversary, but it's a little bit hard to get a clear picture. And I know it's fairly new. Some see it as global gangsterism and personal profit, frankly, for the president and his family, to the tune of $1.4 billion so far, just in 1 year. That's the Wall Street Journal, by the way. So finally here, the system of the last 80 years, whereby we use deterrence to counter our nuclear-armed enemies and protect our allies. This produced the longest period without great power war since the dawn of the modern state system in 1648. While nuclear weapons dramatically raised the costs of war, the emergence of a liberal rules-based order dramatically raised the benefits of peace, including independence, security, and prosperity. And most of the nations, not all, but most of the nations enjoyed that. I showed you some of the figures. As war became suicidal, peace became lucrative. This is a new path, reversing the calculus that had driven all previous international politics. If this path has indeed been abandoned, the message sent to all countries is this: if you can produce weapons, produce them of all kinds. Countries that have nuclear weapons somehow don't get attacked. But is that the kind of world we want to live in? And here we have a list of the countries that feasibly could develop a nuclear weapon in the next 8 to 10 years, if they decide to do so. If nuclear proliferation is indeed the new order of the day, which country is next? And is this the kind of world we wish to give to our children and grandchildren? As Lawrence Eagleburger observed, the consequence of a world full of nuclear powers to me is so incomprehensible in terms of the dangers that implies. Thank you very much. We'll open it up for questions and comments.
So just like last week, Stacy will be working the left side of the room. I will be working the right side of your room. Also, we flew through these slides through the PowerPoint. Is it okay for them, if anyone would like a copy of the PowerPoint presentation, just send an email to T. Gadzinski, spelled just like it sounds, at manitowoc.org, or just call the library and they'll give you my email address and I will happily send you this PowerPoint. So just be respectful, get your hands up, listen to what people have to say, and let's go.
Could you just flip back to the previous slide? Or one back, I'm sorry, one more back. I think part of the chaos we're all experiencing is that any one of those is in play at any given moment, depending on what he feels like this morning. I think anyone was going to apply it. I think it's part of the case. And And actually, I think it's part of the strategy.
Yes, it is.
Okay, a strategy toward what end? What goal?
Good question. Continued control of this country.
Just something to think about. I don't necessarily have a pat answer myself, but yeah, I do not want to make this just, about that or any single individual. It's bigger than that. It's our country. But there are certain things you can look to that might help get a better idea, like the National Security Strategy that was published about 2 months ago. So you might want to take a look at that. But again, that reflected a lot of, my reading of that is reflected in some of what my observations, that there's just a hatred of Europe. There are people in the first administration, there were what we might call establishment figures. They were very conservative, like John Bolton, but they at least set up some guardrails and said, no, you just really can't do that. This time, those people are all gone. There's no guardrails. And there are some very extreme people in there. There are people who actually want us, I hope this doesn't sound like Joe McCarthy in reverse, but there are people in there who have praised the government of Xi Jinping. They praise Putin all the time. They see Putin as the savior of the white race and Christianity because of his stances. So there are extreme elements that are there. Darren Beatty is one name I'll give you. Just look up, and he's Undersecretary of State for Public Affairs, Beattie, Darren Beatty. He has good credentials, but he has said, and doesn't ever apologize for it, that American farmers American rural people are being treated worse than the Uyghurs in China. And many, many more in that same vein. So that does concern me. And, are we not only throwing the baby out with the bathwater, but are we getting into bed with some of the worst people on the planet? That is my question.
My question is, first of all, I want to thank you for all the wonderful good service you've done as a public intellectual and as a leader of the in politics in Fond du Lac County. My question or observation is that I think Mark Carney said it right. The horse has left the barn. Nobody can trust the United States either as a fair business partner nor as a dependable ally. And I mean, the Ukrainians could sing a lot of songs about that. So that the fact is that places like Canada now and many countries in Europe are trying to look after new arrangements that will work for them, because the arrangements with the United States just have gone. And as one person put it, they can't wait every 4 years to see how Wisconsin votes to try to figure out what the hell to do to protect themselves. Is that a fair assessment, or is that too pessimistic?
Well, I hope it's too pessimistic, but I can't say for sure. And I understand exactly the point that Carney was making and others, because if what's happening right now could happen today, who's to say it couldn't happen again 4 years down the pike or 8 years down the pike? So, but this is what I think some of the folks defending what they're doing right now, that they're overlooking. Now, admittedly, Canada's in a unique position with an extremely long land border with the United States. But in many other cases, they have other places they can go. So the European Union economy, even without the United Kingdom, is still about the same size as that of the United States. So other countries can make deals with them, and it's already happening. Or India, here's another country that, in my opinion, is vital to our interests, because we need a big friend living next to China to help us. And they've been cooperating in that. We have the Quad. I gave a talk on that a couple of years ago, the four-way. It's not a formal alliance, but agreement. And India does cooperate militarily. But for some reason, recently, the president got angry with India because they were buying Russian oil. Well, we buy Russian uranium. Why is that okay? And India can't buy Russian oil. So he slapped a 150% tariff on all goods coming from India. Here's still a very poor country showing real signs of economic development and actually a fast-growing economy these days. But you're crippling their export industries, or threatening to do so. What did Modi do just a week or so after that? Went to a meeting with Xi Jinping and Putin in Moscow. Is that what you want to be doing? Forcing India to go with our enemies? I don't think so. So the fact is, other countries have options. And even Canada is working on agreements with Europe. It's a lot easier for them to trade with us because they just send it over the border. But they can ship it to Europe. Europe needs timber. Most of their forests are gone. They could work out other arrangements. So again, even though we are the leading economy with about a quarter or a bit more of total production in the world, that still lives 3/4 of it outside. And so there's a lot of places other countries can go, and they will go. If you're not a reliable partner, if you don't keep your agreements, I don't want to oversimplify things, but gosh, what if you had somebody here in Manitowoc that did business like that? What would happen to that person? I mean, who never kept an agreement, who tried to cheat everybody that he dealt with? Or similarly, again, I hope I'm not oversimplifying, but how could you ask for a better neighbor than Canada?
Oh, yeah.
Extremely friendly, send us billions in tourism every winter, especially. Send us Canadian bacon, which I love, maple syrup, all these great things. And you turn on them and accuse them of shipping fentanyl to the United States. It's inconceivable why you would do that.
He lies.
I mean, I'm trying to rationalize some of these things, but I just can't see it. Again, commonsensically, if you have a neighbor and you're on good terms, your property lines abut, and the sidewalk comes together in front of your house, and you're getting along fine, and there's no disputes, do you just out of the blue go over there and start criticizing the way he or she cuts their hair? Or accuse them of, eating your pets? Some outlandish, would a rational person do that?
Well, he's not rational.
Okay, well, I guess that's a point that I've spent quite a bit of time here trying to establish. Again, I try to present evidence, and you're free to question any of it. And I have sources, but that sources can be wrong. But believe me, I do my best to present things accurately. So this antagonistic, and it's not paying off. See, this is, again, an example of a lose-lose situation. We were getting along fine. Yes, we imported timber from Canada. Why? Because they have a comparative advantage in timber. They have huge forests, way more than we do. The country is like 90% forest. So they have abundant, fine. But we have better manufacturing, we have better high tech. We run a surplus in services with the world every year. That's insurance, finance, marketing, public relations, all those, education. That's another thing that's being killed. Our universities were attracting some of the best and brightest from all over the world. And now they're being told we don't want you. Talking at dinner, my medical providers, people probably responsible for me still being here, quite honestly. One got his doctorate, MD, at the University of Damascus, Syria, and another one is from New Delhi, India. And these are my electrophysiologists and my cardiologists. And believe me, they keep a careful eye on me. And I trust them. And they have won awards for their competence. So again, I just do not see a rational reason for this very abrupt change of direction. Yes, absolutely, we have made mistakes in the past. And our leadership was not perfect by any means. But still, despite the mistakes, our friends stuck with us. And they would continue to stick with us if we didn't turn our back on them and accuse them of being parasites and just taking advantage of us, when in fact, we have reaped major benefits from being the leader of what we like to call the free world. We have reaped a lot of benefits. Now, one final thing, we'll see if there's more questions. If your argument is that the people of the United States have not shared equitably in those gains, I would agree with you. But whose fault is that? That's not the foreigners' fault. That's our own Congress. That's our own people writing our tax laws. That's the people who won't fund our Trade Adjustment Act that's been on the books since the 1960s. That's supposed to take people, if they do get displaced from a job because of trade competition from abroad, they're supposed to be paid retraining expenses and even relocation expenses if need be. It's never been funded at any kind of a decent level. Denmark, to pick another example, spends 2% of its GDP each year on retraining, relocation, re-education, transitional things for the workforce. 2% of their GDP. We spend less than 0.5%. They're spending 4 times as much as a percentage of their economy. We could do that too, but we choose not to. But that's the choice of our decision makers. That's nobody foreign deciding that. So if it's not distributed the way we want it in this country, we have the power to change that. But we haven't done it. It's much easier to blame foreigners. Just much easier. So that's unfortunately the route that we've been taking. Okay, maybe, yeah. We don't have to be out of here for another 15 minutes.
That is correct. Next, who went their hand up?
There's one in the back.
Okay.
Oh, I'm older than you, and thank you for coming all these years.
I doubt it, but.
I am totally flummoxed. after watching the world this long, where did this seemingly hatred, this rabid hatred towards everybody else come from? You teach students, did you see a trend coming? Where did it come from?
Well, I'll tell you the truth. I think some of it's always been there, but it's been kind of kept down. And now we have opportunistic politicians who see they can get power by amplifying it up, by repeating it, by stoking it, by pouring fuel on the fire, making all kinds of wild accusations against immigrants, against foreigners. I think so. That's my answer to it. That's the difference between responsible leadership and irresponsible leadership, or frankly, being a demagogue. By definition, demagogue is somebody that plays to the lowest emotions: envy, hatred, fear. So you're not happy with your lot in life? I'll give you somebody to blame it on. I'll show you who it is. And then together we'll take care of them. Does that sound familiar from an earlier time in the 20th century? Yeah, and it's happening right now. So there's always that potential, but responsible leadership appeals to the higher emotions. And that does not mean misleading people, but it means trying to bring out the best in people. And I'll be a little bit autobiographical myself. But over the years, I've had a lot of feedback from students and former students, and some good and maybe some not as good. But the one I liked the best was somebody looked at me with, we were with friends, and said, "Professor Farrell tried to bring out the best in us." That's the best compliment I've ever had, and because that is what I was trying to do. But that's also I'm not thereby patting myself in the back. But another, where I grew up in Winona, Minnesota, I do remember some rules. One was, don't toot your own horn. Well, I guess that was wrong. Who's the person that toots his own horn more than anybody else in the world? Happens to be the most powerful person in the world right now. So I guess that was wrong. I also learned that with every right comes a responsibility. So you have a right of free speech, but you need to use that to tell the truth, not to spread lies or propaganda. So tell the truth. That's your responsibility. And now what was the third one? Can't be that important, I can't remember it. But anyway, you get my idea.
Wasn't it, be careful driving back from lacrosse?
Yeah. That was one of them. Yeah, Wisconsin had 18-year-old drinking at the time, and Minnesota was 21. And Winona is about 20 miles north of La Crosse, so you know your geography.
Good evening. You mentioned India before and the tariffs on India. Now, India is part of the BRICS group of countries. And I don't know if I heard this right or not, but within the last week, I heard that the U.S. signed an agreement with India that basically put a wedge in between India, a small wedge in between India and the rest of the BRICS countries. Have you heard anything like that?
I can't say about specifics. It might well be right, because there are so many separate deals being made, it's hard to even keep track of them. But I don't doubt it. But what is the BRICS are one of these alternative groups that people could turn to for trade agreements. And so trying to pry them away from that would fit into the strategy that we're talking about. So I will check into that just for my own satisfaction. I'm not aware of it exactly. And I think there's been a backing off of the 150% tariffs, just like there's been a up and down, back and forth with all kinds of them. But
Yeah, again, see, we had something, again, people really do not understand foreign trade. And I've given other presentations trying to explain that better than from my viewpoint anyway. But we had something called Trans-Pacific Partnership, all lined up. And that was 11 or 12 countries, including the United States, but several of the Asian countries, but excluding China. So we're trying to wean them away from dependence on China. But that was then denounced in the 2016 campaign, and we totally dropped it. Trans-Pacific Partnership. That would have been one of the most intelligent things we could have done to counter China. Get us grouped together with these other countries. China was excluded. But that was thrown away because of the allegation that we're always taken advantage of in every deal. That all of our leaders are stupid and they make dumb deals that have hurt us so bad. I tried to show you, I don't think overall we have been hurt that bad. I think we've reaped lion's share of the benefits. And what is really being threatened is crashing a system that has actually been very beneficial to us. So Trans-Pacific Partnership, in my opinion, should have been continued, should have been consummated, but it was thrown out of the dustbin of history, as we say. And I think it's going to be very hard to revive it. Okay. Oh, looks like we got a couple more here.
I really compliment you on being so candid. Most of our professors that talk are kind of, you get the feeling that they don't want to make too many waves. And you're outstanding in making your point of view clear. But do you see hope for the future? Do you see some of the demonstrations and some of the, so do you see hope? Because it does look in many ways very bleak for any way the years ahead.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, admittedly, I make sure that I read the people that are providing the critique and trying to show rationally what, as I try to do, what is misguided about what we're doing. So, and I think they have big audiences. Like, is it Heather Cox Richardson? Yeah. She is one. Jill Lepore is another of the New Yorker. Paul Krugman, who is the Nobel Prize winner in economics. He's one I actually pay for. Nate Silver happens to be, not name dropping here too much, but personal friend of mine from days we were both in Chicago. I pay for his blog every day. So yeah, there's plenty of intelligent voices out there that are trying to, and also, I mean, certainly, again, I don't rely on public opinion polls, but if you look at them, you'll see that a strong majority of the American people do not agree with what is being done in either the foreign or the domestic realm. It's quite strong. It's like 60% or more on most items, including, I showed you, 80%, or nearly 80% in the poll that I cited here, which was from last year, say the United States should not sacrifice its leading role among its allies. 80%. Now, again, there's ways of phrasing questions, but I think the question was correctly understood. So that's also why you're seeing the threatened shenanigans with the elections, because of a fear of losing. And so there's definitely hope
And I don't know, I guess I'm not going to give up. So I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing. And they can't take away my emeritus status. Hey, I get a free gym membership with that.
And we have one final question.
This is going back to more at the beginning of your lecture, and when you're talking about the number of countries and how much nuclear arms they have, or how do they keep track of that? Who investigates? I mean, who lets you in to see your nuclear stuff?
That was being done. IAEA, International Atomic Energy Association. Yeah, when we were dealing with the Soviet Union and later Russia in terms of these agreements, there were international inspectors that went into their country and our country and were allowed us to see what was going on. So remember.
But for real?
Yeah. Well, again, look, somebody can try to cheat.
Yeah.
But it may not be to your advantage. Because if I find out you're cheating, that gives me an incentive to do something about it right now.
Right.
So it's very destabilizing to be cheating. And don't enter into the agreement in the first place if you're not willing to do it. Nobody forced you to agree to this. You agreed to it because you understood that there's no reason to have 30,000 armed nuclear devices out there. 3,000 is more than enough. You don't need 30, and it's expensive. It all costs money. So if the other side will agree to cut down, then we can cut down and we'll still be at par, still be parity.
Right.
But no, these have been verified. Remember Ronald Reagan? Trust but verify. And the IAEA and other inspectors were the verification teams. Okay? I guess we got to get out of the library now. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Farrell. I hope that everyone can come back next week. Our topic is U.S.-China relations, and we have a new lecturer next week. His name is Shale Horowitz from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. So hope to see you next week. Have a great night.
Nice to meet you.